Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. This is Jeff Hancock from Cornell University, and he is the co-chair of the iSchool. And what's really cool, one of the things that you guys might know about Cornell is they're just starting a brand new campus in Manhattan, and so he'll be there. But just love the title of the talk because it's a little devious. So Jeff focuses on social media, and one of his focuses is looking at deception, interpersonal communication, and the psychological effects of online interaction. So please welcome him and enjoy the talk.
All right. Thanks, Lily. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here. It's my first time at a Microsoft campus on this side of the continent. So I've spent some time at the Cambridge one and also in the UK. So this is my first time here, kind of I believe it's the mothership kind of situation, right? So very excited. Let me give you a little more background. Lily is totally right about where I'm at and what I'm doing, and I'm happy to talk about the New York Tech campus and Cornell's idea about what that's going to be. It's a $2 billion campus located on Roosevelt Island, so it's basically right beside Manhattan. It's going to be all entrepreneurial oriented, so it's a completely applied thing with the idea of creating sort of co-located corporate and entrepreneurial space. So a bit more about me is I'm a psychologist by training, so all my degrees are in cognitive science, but I live in these other departments, so information science and communication. Hopefully, although I've been in the States for almost 10 years now, you can still hear a little bit of my Canadian accent. So I grew up in a place called Kelowna in the Okanagan, which is just north of here a little bit. And I was looking over the Fuse lab projects when Lily and I connected. I was sort of blown away. Oftentimes in academia, a lab will have a pretty serious focus. And what I realized about the Fuse labs is they sort of have a similar approach, which is do really cool stuff that you're interested in. And so I'm going to do a kind of talk I've never given before today, which is rather than doing one big, long, deep dive on a program of research that we have, I'm going to do 3 medium-sized dives. And they're going to be on these 3 things. And so again, unlike most of my talks, there won't be one overarching theoretical perspective. There will be theories associated with each of these phenomenon. But instead, I want to talk about sort of a meta issue, which is I think about the distinction between people's beliefs around social media and actually the dynamics as we sort of can measure them. I think there's a huge mismatch between those oftentimes, and a lot of it comes down to fear. So let's get started, and it's Friday afternoon, and if you read my abstract, I did give some fair warning. I'm going to make you guys do some stuff. And you're going to be the first to ever do this particular task. So I'm going to start off with an experiment. And you have to start by choosing a partner. No singletons allowed. Come on. Talking about social media. No lonely crowds out there. Choose a partner. If you're far away, get closer together. And then you have to decide which of you has the darker colored shirt. So of the 2 partners, who has the darker colored shirt? That's not the complete task. There you go. And now the person with the lighter colored shirt, I'd like you to close your eyes. Close your eyes very tightly. Do not open them until I explicitly say so. Remember, Lily told you I do study deception. I will find you if you open your eyes. Okay, so those of you that are wearing the darker shades, those of you with your eyes still open, there's some instructions for you. As you can see, those instructions. So anybody still need to look at those? Everybody's good? No? Okay. Dark colored shirts, thank you. Please open your eyes. Sorry, light colored. Very good. I like how the people that were in the dark. That's very good. I'd like to say that was a test, but you're just good. Well, let's go ahead and tell your story, please. Tell your partner your story. God. Sorry. That's okay. I feel bad for you. Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. Chime in.
Sorry, we got one day of this. My interaction here. It's really exciting to be here. We always go to Cancun. We're always afraid. But if you eat in Cancun, if you eat at any of the resorts, you're okay. Because the water is so good there.
Okay, wrap up your story. And let's pause here. Perfect. Thank you, guys. Now let's just see a show of hands for, and we have a different test where I reverse the other one. So who was telling the stories again? It was the dark shirts. Okay, so light-colored shirts. It's your turn now. I'm really curious. You guys had to close your eyes. You sort of had like a meditative little experience there. Raise your hand, those of you that are feeling really good today. Any of you feeling really good today? Okay, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this side, and 1, 2 on this side. All right, perfectly. Now in this highly scientific study, we've just demonstrated a small something. Here's what the instructions were for the room when you guys had your eyes closed. So the dark-colored shirts had to do something sort of sad on this side, and only 2 people raised their hands. They were very sad. On this side, 5 people were feeling, oh, you know what, I feel really great today. Okay, now, how can that happen? And let me just say, obviously, we do things a little more carefully than this in the lab, but what happened in general? What's happening there?
Contagion.
Yeah. Contagion, right. How does it happen? How did it happen with your thing?
It seems like empathy, where it's like this person is kind of unloading to you, and the empathetic response.
Still looks so sad.
Right. Yeah, I almost feel like we should do some debriefing on this side. It's like, hey, everybody, jump up and down. You're going to be all right. No, exactly. You put yourself into their position, and it can make you feel really upset. Very good. Any other mechanisms that it could operate on? So a lot of work has shown that as soon as you enter a room, without talking to anybody, you can start to feel some contagion. In fact, most theorists on contagion have argued that there are nonverbal mechanisms, from facial expressions to posture to even olfactory senses. So those of you, these people over here were telling things as if they were happy today, and by doing that, they changed the way their body moved and oriented itself, and they may have even producing some different smells. Okay. Well, one of the biggest questions around emotion and text is that text removes all of that. Okay, so text is this really non-verbally poor channel. And when we have somebody that say like this or like that, with the fact that there's a screen in between us gets rid of all of that. And this assumption that emotion is communicated primarily non-verbally is a very powerful, very old assumption. And the modern legacy probably comes from Paul Ekman, a very famous, a huge impact social psychologist. And he was interested in emotion and facial expression. And so we have been studying and thinking about how the face, the body, other nonverbal cues express emotion. So what happens when we go into text? Well, when we survey people, what we hear is that most people think that you can't communicate emotion in text very well, if at all. And that this is the number one reason why there are so many arguments on email, and why, when lovers, need to get together physically, et cetera, that text has this paucity. You cannot express emotion very well in text. And this is a very powerful assumption. As I said, when we sample people throughout the nation, this is the responses that we get. But there's a number of researchers in the CMC, computer-mediated communication world, that sort of predated the social media dynasty, is that we adapt to the verbal channel. So you were here, you were talking to each other, you not only had the words that you could use to set yourself into an empathetic space, you also had your bodies. And what people like Joe Walther have argued is that we can use our words, our timing, and our punctuation to express emotion in text. And so I'm going to just talk about one really simple study, and then the study 2 is actually a really interesting study. I think it's the first of its kind to show emotional contagion in text. And I'll tell you a little bit about the study that we're doing at Facebook right now that sort of shows it out in the wild. So we're going to start with a very simple first study. And the very first simple study is, can we tell if somebody is happy or sad in text? Okay. Very simple. It turns out no one's ever actually done that before. You'd think they would. We do a really easy paradigm where you have an actor. The person's supposed to act happy or act sad. And normally they're very trained, very good at doing this, but instead of doing it face-to-face, they had to do it in text. None of them had ever done that before. But we just simply asked them how they did it afterwards. The partner came to the lab and they thought, it's just a get-to-know-you experiment. We're looking at how people communicate online. At the end, we ask, how is your partner feeling, using a questionnaire. And here's really, it's interesting only in the size of the effect. So we asked people afterwards, how happy were they? And what was the relationship quality you think you would have if you were to hang out with them again? And so the people that were acting sad, they were perceived by their partner as really sad. But look at these effect sizes. If we were to do this as an effect size, that's greater than a standard deviation. It's about 1.5 standard deviations. It's not even close. It's not even close at all. People had no problem telling when their partner was acting happy or sad. And the people, when we asked them, how did you act happy? How did you act sad? Happy people used a ton of punctuation, and we'll see this is important. It's almost like the prosody of online communication. They agreed a lot more. Whatever the other person said, they just agreed with them. They responded quickly, which is consistent with depression. So depressed people tend to actually communicate at much lower rates, consistent with the word count thing here. So these ones are, we asked them what they did, and here's what they actually did when we analyzed their language. So they spoke more, they used more, so the sad people used more emotion terms, especially negative emotion terms, kind of obviously. And the sad people just disagreed. So happy people reported agreeing more, and it's true. These people, the sad people, actually disagreed more. So if we ask somebody to, hey, act happy or act sad, they can do it in text, and it's actually zero problem. Now, the fact that we had to do this study, because it's never been done before, and the fact that it flies in the face of a lot of what we do, is really shocking to me. And when I think about what my most important possessions are, probably like the love letters my wife and I wrote back when we were dating would rank amongst them. And they were these incredibly intense things. And my wife and I are not alone in that. We can go back looking from Shakespeare up to Elizabeth Barrett Brown. Letters, words can just drip with emotion. And so this idea that emotion can't express, text can't express emotion, is just one of these problematic beliefs that people have. And I think it actually has nothing to do necessarily with increased disagreements or difficulties with communicating, say, in email. There, I think, and we can talk more about this at the end, it's much more about synchrony. So when I send an email, I have zero feedback about how that person's interpreting it. It has very little to do with whether they understood my emotions. I'm also happy to talk about emoticons. I think they're one of the most poorly named things ever. They have nothing to do, in my view, with emotions. But they are important. They just have nothing to do with emotions. Okay, and again, these are things, and if we want to interrupt and ask questions, that's totally fine by me too. So the next question is, can we induce emotion? Now, in the actor case, it's problematic to see if we can induce it, because that person that's acting happy or acting sad, he may not actually be feeling that at all, and his partner, she might be picking up something that's his actual thing. So we need to now induce emotion, and then see if the people that are interacting with that person can actually, if it actually changes their emotion. Okay? So now we're not doing a detection task, we're going to see if we can watch emotions spread from one person to another. So following all the emotional contagion literature, and there's a fair bit of it now in social psychology, we had 3-person groups. It turns out that a group is much more conducive to contagion than just a dyad, though we've shown it in dyads as well. We have a person that we're going to call the experiencer, and we do really bad things to them. So first of all, we get them to watch this movie. Has anybody ever seen it, My Bodyguard? Yeah, it's an older one. A lot of times people think it's the Whitney Houston one. No, exactly the opposite, basically. It's really horrible. It's really a lot about bullying and things. We have to have tissues in the room because a lot of people cry. And so they think this is study 1, and their understanding is this is the study they've come into the lab to do. And the lab right next door to mine is run by Mike Shapiro, who studies entertainment psychology. So they're told that they're doing this study with them. At the finish of it, which is it's very fast, takes 5-10 minutes, they're told if they want, they can do another study with the social media lab, and that's a multitasking study. Okay, and so after they've done this study where they watch a thing and then they answer some things about their emotions, they come over to our lab and they do another study in which they're going to be talking with some people about what are the most important and difficult things you face when you first come to college. That's task number 1. Task number 2 is they're filling out anagrams. So the experiencers, they're filling out anagrams that go to angry and malice and these, they very mean anagrams. And they're listening to some of my favorite heavy metal, which is actually really terrible stuff if you're not into heavy metal. And so they're multitasking, they're having to do this anagram task, they're having to do this, and they're listening to really, really awful music for most Cornell undergrads. And the reason we need to do that is when we first did these studies, we would get them to do something like the My Bodyguard, and then they would talk to somebody. By the time they were done talking to them, they would feel fine. And it turns out there's an effect called the talking therapy, which is quite common. Now, the control person, there's 2 of them. There are partners of the experiencer. They watch what is possibly one of the most boring movies ever, and they fill out very sort of neutral anagrams, and they listen to, I think it was Wynton Marsalis, who I have nothing against. But it's pretty, easygoing stuff. So this is the 2 conditions. They can be in the negative affect condition, in which there's an experiencer and 2 partners, or there's a control condition in which all 3 partners are having this experience. Okay? Is everybody good with that design? Okay. So there's 22 groups of 3, 2 conditions, tips for surviving freshman year. To be clear, we have a film clip that they do. They think that's study 1. They're asked if they want to do some more. They do the multitasking study, which is activity, and then they fill out the final questionnaires. So first of all, were our experiencers feeling bad? Yes. So using the PNAS, which is a pretty common a measure of emotion that looks at positive affect and negative affect, you can see that people in the negative affect condition overall were experiencing a lot of negative emotion. In particular, they were feeling really intense negative emotion. These people were quite upset during the whole thing, which is what we want. Now, on the end of it, we use another emotional measure, so they didn't get too savvy to the fact they were looking at emotion both times. We used the circumplex, which we can also take a look at. It's a little bit different from the PNAS, but it can give us some dimensions of emotion that are similar. What matters here is not the experiencer. We can see that the experiencer, despite talking to other people that weren't upset, still is feeling quite upset, quite tense. The really key comparison is between these 2. This is how the people in the neutral groups are feeling. They were watching that bland movie and bland anagrams, etc. Here's how they're feeling. Now, these people had the exact same experience as these people, except they're talking to this person. So our key difference is here. And although this is rather slight, it is significant. And what we can see is that these people are much more tense after talking to this person than this person. A couple key points here. So these people aren't acting at all. They didn't discuss about how they were feeling. They didn't know that their emotions were being manipulated. And yet, through text, these people were feeling much higher negative affect afterwards than not. So this is, as I was saying, the first demonstration of emotional contagion in a laboratory setting. Yes?
Can you just clarify real quick? You said that they talked and that they text. Was there verbal talk or text?
Texting.
Texting, okay.
Yeah, the world for me has merged into text. So that when I say talk, I mean text. Yeah.
So there was no physical cues
Never.
at all? These people...
No physical cues. They didn't even see the other person beforehand.
Okay.
Yeah. Here and then there.
So how is tension different from negative affect?
Yes, excellent question. So it turned out that with negative affect, it's too broad. And so we still see some difference. It's trending in the right direction, but wasn't significant. When we looked inside of those, and I'll show a few more, I believe, the intense negative emotion ones popped. So intense negative emotion is above, and this tension one goes above. The general negative affect was just, I guess, too diffuse of a measure on the circumplex. And so we don't see that. Tension, in particular, is about feeling anxious. And so we think that it's partly contagion. So you can see these people are feeling very anxious as well. we think, and we're doing some follow-up studies, that this is also about the fact that they're like, what is wrong here? Like something isn't right, which may be similar to what the person was saying earlier about empathy, where you can detect that something is weird and that makes you upset, rather than necessarily this just flowing. Here and then Lily.
When they followed up to do their texting, were they talking about neutral topics? Like, was there a set of things they were supposed to talk about, or were they getting indignant and that was...
No, right. Good question. We do analyze the language afterwards. I'll show you that in a second. We did a standard emotional contagion task where it's important that they talk about emotionally meaningful and typically negative things because you want the discussion to match the emotion you're doing. And so it was about the difficult things that you encounter in your freshman year and some survival tips for getting over those hard things. Yeah. But everybody does that, including the neutral groups. Really?
Do you find that negative feelings are more contagious than happy feelings, or are they kind of similar?
The literature suggests that negative are much more contagious. But we have another study where we were doing a happy condition, and it was contagious as well. We haven't replicated that. We've replicated the negative emotion, but we haven't done the happy. But the whole literature says if you're going to do an emotional contagion study, do negative emotions, and the more intense, the better. Yeah.
The neutral group and the partners get to talk it out?
Yeah, this is a little bit confusing. So in fact, this neutral group, this consists of 3 people talking on their own, and this consists of 2 people talking to this person. So these people never interact with these people. Good question. Yeah, and we really struggle on how to do that because this is being represented by 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, and these 2 people are hanging out. Yeah.
They were texting on, or?
Yes, they were texting on how to survive freshman year.
No, I mean the devices.
Oh, it was GChat.
Okay.
So they were sitting at computers in separate cubicles in the lab after they had just finished doing the big emotion study thing. Yeah.
So if the neutral group had partners too, would that, is there any study on how, like, do people get really neutral, just like what we saw for the negative affect thing?
Yeah. It's really difficult to know what to do with this other group. You could rely on random assignment to have these people just be acting neutral on average, but we decided to specifically hold them to a certain type of thing that was the same as this. If anything, that procedure works against us because these people are getting really nice, neutral, bland primes the whole time they're talking to this person. If they were just like interacting and not getting these continual primes, you could imagine this going up. But we wanted a more stringent sort of control. Yeah. Great questions. Then we did look at the language. So what are the mechanisms? How is it that text, words can act as a conduit of emotional contagion? And the answer right now is we don't have a very good idea. There are some promising directions. So for instance, here's disagreement terms. We use a program called Luke, which probably many of you are familiar with. Very common in the psych literature now. It counts the number of times a certain type of word occurs, like disagreement, and then it plots it as a percentage of the total number of words that the person used. You can see the people that were feeling really upset used a lot of disagreement words, which matches back onto the actor study that we had. But the people that were feeling a lot of tension, the partners, used a lot of disagreement words too. So it could be that linguistic style matching is the mechanism by which this happens, but we're still working on this this sort of approach of linguistic style matching. And so I don't have the slides from Adam yet, but we're working with Adam Kramer at Facebook, and they're doing 2 studies that build off of these experiments. So these are very controlled, small-scale experiments. So at Facebook, the data science team is trying to scale this up, and one study has been completed, looking at the negativity, positivity of your status updates that you see. Okay, so what's important there is it's non-directed. It isn't about you telling somebody about your trip. It's just like, hey, I'm in Seattle and I'm having a really fun time at MSR. Okay, so any of you that get my updates in your feed would have just got an uptick on positive words. And Facebook can detect that using a modified version of this Luke program. And then you can also measure the number of negative words that come into the update. Okay, so what you can do for each person, and it looked at about 500,000 people, is you can create a incoming positivity index for their updates. And it's a tough one because you don't even know if the person looked at that update or not. But nonetheless, here's their update stream for a day. Take all of those updates that were coming in that I may have seen, create a positivity, negativity index. Then what I do is track me, and I look at the number of updates I produce, a much smaller amount. I look at the number of updates I produce on day 1, day 2, and day 3 afterwards. And what we're finding is a very small effect that in the statistics that we're trying to figure out how to use, because I've never done studies with 500,000 people. I'm an n equals 22 kind of guy. It's there, and it's exactly the direction that you would predict. So people that had higher incoming but non-directional, so happier updates, produced more happy updates for the 3 days afterwards. And the people that had higher negative produced more negative afterwards for 3 days, which is shocking to me. And as I said, the effect is tiny. We're talking like, say, 1.03% change for the happy going up and 0.97 change for going down. But when you multiply that by the number of people, 500,000, and the number of updates that are produced, we're talking about 300,000 or 400,000 more positive updates produced by people by that 1.03, and about 600,000 more negative ones being produced by that 0.97 change. So it's like smoking, like smoking effects are tiny, but when you multiply them out to the population, a lot of people can die. So not quite the same analogy, but the same idea. Okay, so that's emotional contagion. That's our medium depth dive, and we've done a bunch of studies. The last one with the Facebook one is we're actually manipulating some people's streams so that some people for a day will get no positive status updates, and some people will get no negative. I didn't think they would ever go for that, but they are. So can't wait, and I'll let you guys know what we find.
How many people, like how many posted people will do that for negative and how many will do that for positive?
That's been a really difficult part. So we ran it once already in December, and the data did not work out because we didn't have the proper sort of controls about what we needed to proportionalize by. But they've just rerun it, and we'll get the data soon, I hope. Okay, so that was emotional contagion. Going to switch over to another topic that's somewhat related. And perhaps now we'll start to see the theme that comes through. You're going to see more and more in the news. This week it just started, but next week is probably when it'll really hit the mainstream. But some studies just came out in, I believe JPSB, but maybe PSPB, showing this contrast effect. So we all feel worse as people because we look at other people on Facebook, and the other people on Facebook are optimizing their lives. So they all look like they're having an awesome time, and we look at that and we know we're not having as awesome time, and therefore we feel crappy. Okay, so there's this study coming out, and there's a number of other sort of thought pieces that have suggested the same sort of thing. And it's compelling, and the study, I think, is well done. They only look, however, at self-report as one issue, and they only look at a part of what, say, something like Facebook is. So another part of Facebook is looking at your own profile. Yes, we do spend a lot of time looking at others, but we also look at our own. And we wanted to look and see, first of all, is it the case that 850 million people would use something that would make them depressed on average? Which probably you're going to start thinking, oh, that's similar to the text and emotion thing. But second of all, there's some very important things about the Facebook profile that suggest that it should act quite differently. So this is work that was really driven by two of my PhD students that just recently graduated. Amy's now a professor at Indiana, and Catalina's at the University of Wisconsin. And Amy did this first study, kind of dragged me kicking and screaming into it. Self-esteem, I wasn't very interested, but she wanted to just do a really simple study. Let's get people to look at their own Facebook profile in one condition, look at a mirror in another condition, and fill out some surveys that were unrelated to Facebook or mirrors in a third control condition. And it turns out this is very similar to a study done in the 70s where people, when they looked in a mirror, they felt worse than if they sat in a room and didn't look in a mirror. And the thinking from that was this idea that when we look in a mirror, it highlights all the ways we are not matching our idealized self. And Amy's insight was, but Facebook allows us to optimize that self a little bit, and maybe when we look at our own Facebook profile, we'll feel better about self. Maybe we're closer to that ideal self. And indeed, that's what she found. Okay, so it was a very nice, quick, light study. Look at your own Facebook, look at some control material or look at a mirror. And sure enough, Facebook had a higher, afterwards you self-reported a higher self-esteem than if you looked in a mirror. Okay, that caused Catalina and I to go into this in a little bit more depth. And we wanted to come at it with a very big theory. In fact, probably many of you have heard of it. It's been tested hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And actually, there's a famous psychologist in the Netherlands that was just found to be fraudulent on 19 of his studies, faking data or whatever. It was on self-affirmation theory. And we cited some of his stuff. Yeehaw. Okay, so we looked at self-affirmation theory. It's actually pretty straightforward. It says we all want to feel good about ourselves. We've built up a number of defensive mechanisms to make sure that idea of us being pretty awesome is in place. And the third is that when we are affirmed, when we feel good about what we really care about in life, and I'll go over what that is, then these defensive mechanisms get reduced. Okay, so when we really focus on what's important to us in life, then our universal need for positive self-regard doesn't require as many defensive mechanisms. And don't worry, though I thought about it, I was going to get you guys to do a self-affirmation task. I'm not going to make you guys feel good about yourselves. Don't worry. Okay, so what really matters with self-affirmation is the way to do it is if I would get you guys to write down a list of the 10 things that are most important to you. And many things that would come up would be your family, what you do here at Microsoft, the relationships that you have with people here. And when you write that list, I would then get you to say take the top 3 and write a paragraph about how important those top 1, 2, or 3 things are. But really, social roles, relationships, values, identities, these are the key parts of it. And so if you think about what's on Facebook, for example, a lot of the information that is on your own profile actually speaks to all of that. Relationships, social roles, the personal relationship you have. I mean, this is the raison d'etre, other than advertising, of Facebook, right? I mean, this is what we do there as we visualize our relationships. And it's really about identity. So this is one of our honors students. She's a dancer, she's a sailor, and sometimes a banana. And she puts all of those things up on her Facebook profile because those are different parts of her identities. And when you talk to Kate, it's really important. She loves dancing. She's an instructor now. Whenever she can, she goes sailing. And she's actually a pretty fun-loving person. And those are all important identities. So Facebook, in a way, your own profile highlights, visualizes, if you will, the very things that self-affirmation theory says is important. And so what we wanted to ask is that effect that Amy Gonzalez saw with self-esteem, is it operating through self-affirmation? So to visualize self-affirmation, here's this thing. You threaten somebody, you make them feel bad, so you say you actually suck at X. And then what you typically see is defensiveness kicks in. So if I were the person to say that you were bad at something, then your defensive mechanisms could include thinking that I was an idiot, thinking that the task was dumb, thinking that the actual advice I was providing was incorrect, those sort of things. So we have these built-in mechanisms that can act to defend us against ego threat. And the very basic, simple idea of self-affirmation is that when you go through this self-affirmation process, it removes the need for defensive mechanisms to kick in because they've been sort of built up already through focusing on what is important to you. So self-affirmation decreases defensiveness. So that's what we're going to try and measure by getting people to look basically at Facebook or at somebody else's Facebook profile. Now, in the standard way of doing self-affirmation, you would do this sort of thing, get you to write about important values, as I said. So here's one person's actual thing. They say, I'm always comforted by my relationships and grateful I have such wonderful people in my life. Here's one that's about the least important values, and this is, again, taken from the study. My least valued choice, it may be more important for others who are more active in the community. So they're talking about politics here. Okay? So we can see this is a typical way that hundreds of studies have manipulated self-affirmation. The way we were going to manipulate self-affirmation is you came in and we gave you about 5 minutes to look at your own profile. You weren't allowed to go off of your own profile page, but you focused on your own profile. Now, let's say that I had Lily come in and she was assigned to the self-affirming condition, the Facebook self-affirming condition. She was come to this. And let's say Scott was the next participant and he was assigned to the control condition, then he would see Lily's Facebook profile. So just to be clear on that, the only profile that was ever looked at in this case is Lily's. And in one case, Lily was looking at it. She generated all the content. It's her profile. Or Scott came in and he looked at Lily's profile. So the information that was viewed by the participants in the two conditions is identical. And that's why they're yoked. And only thing that differs is in one condition, they've actually produced it themselves, and it's about their loved ones and their families and their values. In the other, it's not. So just to step you through it, we had to threaten them somehow. So the way we did that is they had to give a speech. And then afterwards, we would give them a chance to self-affirm. So they either went on Facebook and looked at their own profile or looked at somebody else's. Okay, so you guys understand that. Or in the traditional condition, they either did it by writing one of these two essays, so they would be assigned to one or the other. So there's a Facebook self-affirming condition, and there's a traditional written-out self-affirming condition, and then there's the two controls. And then after they'd done that, we threatened their academic self-concept by telling them that they were really bad. And this is what everybody got. And these are Cornell students in psych or in communication. This killed them. And so this is what, like as I said, every single person gets this. So they've either been self-affirmed, Facebook, or through the traditional method, or they've just had a control, and then they get threatened. Afterwards, we want to know, we're really interested in how you thought this goes, because we really want to make sure that when we do these online speeches, that this system works well. So what do you think? And we asked them what they thought of the feedback about the competence of the evaluator, the task. We allowed them to make some attributions, and then how much they liked the evaluator. Okay? And I could build up the slides but for each of those independent things, but you can see it's identical. Red is when they looked at their own profile, and gray is when they looked at a stranger. Is that right? Stranger's profile. Yeah, so feedback accuracy, lower. Evaluator competence, not very competent. Task, stupid. Attribution, dumb. And attraction to evaluator was low. So in each and every condition, I have a star there because usually that slide's a build, but I didn't want to waste your time. So yes, Facebook, when you look at your own profile compared to somebody else's profile, reduces your defensiveness. But what's really, really, really interesting, and I'll tell you about the replication we've just done, is this slide here. This has been done hundreds of times in psychology. It's made it into science. Okay, so this is the classic self-affirmation effect. I mean, it can make you less likely to drink, less likely to smoke, more likely to improve your grades next semester. I mean, it's insane, except for the ones where that guy was lying about all of his data. And so what we see is this. This is the classic thing. So opportunity to self-affirm, they wrote an essay about their most important value, and this is how much they responded to the feedback. They were like, yeah, okay, that's interesting feedback. Maybe I should use disfluencies, left option, etc. Whereas these people really didn't like the feedback. And take a look at what's happening with Facebook. It's identical. There is an interaction effect here. This difference is actually statistically the same as that. But if I were to mask which ones these were, you would not be able to tell which one. So Facebook has the same self-affirmation effects, at least in terms of defensiveness, as does the classic values writing thing. And there was no values writing there. They literally looked at what is on their own Facebook profile and the people that are there. Yes, sir?
So we've talked in the past, as an industry about the opportunity for sort of civilization hacking by, I tap into the front page of New York Times and I can, make the stock market collapse. I could totally imagine that Facebook decides that they're going to have every one of 850 million people go back and look at their profile page right before a presidential election. And, oh, hooray, status quo, whatever that, or, the world is all caving in.
Yeah. I mean, 850 million people. It's a lot, especially if there's these tiny patterns. I ascribe nothing to the emotions that I'm doing with them, but you can imagine why they're interested in this. If there's a way for them to be able to figure out how to make people happier, and when you're happier, you tend to click on ads more. Tiny effect, huge effect. But, so yeah, I think that to me this is crazy. They didn't do anything. They looked at their own stuff. But it's all stuff that we care about, our identity and the people we love and care. In fact, when we ask them afterwards, how do you feel, bunch of adjectives, this sort of semantic differential approach, you can see that it makes you feel good. It makes you feel connected and loved and supported and giving and grateful. And so we've replicated this. I'm just going to tell you, I won't give you slides. Yes? No problem.
I don't know if you mentioned this, but was there a mean number to how many friends your
Ah,
average person
yes.
has?
So that's what we don't,
Activity?
right, that's what we don't know. And what we're doing right now in the lab is we're doing some eye tracking studies to find out how long they spend on different sections and then see if that affects self-affirmation. So our guess is that when you spend a lot of time, so timeline's changing everything, but when you spend a lot of time looking at your friends and who's your friends are, we think that's going to have a really powerful effect.
But the number of friends your average
Right,
person
we don't yet know that. We're now recording all that sort of stuff and doing that. In the replication of this study, we wanted to really get beyond self-report. That was our first sort of approach, rather than figuring out exactly what on Facebook is doing it. Which in retrospect, we probably should have done that first. But in this case, we did something called the IAT, where we did an implicit association task. So let's not see whether they're feeling happy or loved or self-esteem or not. Let's look at whether, with an implicit task, they have higher or lower self-esteem. So using an implicit association task, after you look at your own profile, you have significantly higher self-esteem after looking at your own profile versus somebody else's. That's not self-report. And those same people, we then get to do a math task afterwards. Okay? And the math task is you take 1984 and subtract by 7 for 3 minutes. Yeah, I know. Seems easy, and after a while you're like, God damn it. What we did then is we can measure two things. You can measure how many did they do and how many did they get wrong. You can do a bunch of other things by combining those two numbers, but those turn out to be the ones that are right. They do worse if they've looked at their own Facebook profile. When we looked at that, we're like, oh boy, okay, we're going to have to be really careful to understand what's going on here, because you could imagine the media, for example, jumping all over that. What happens is the people that are self-affirmed, they have higher self-esteem, they've looked at their own Facebook profile, they just choose to do less of the operations. They subtract 7 fewer times. So they get less along. Whereas the people that haven't been affirmed, they're like, yeah, I got to do well in this task. This task is going to define who I am. You know, they're Cornell really anxious students, whereas the affirmed people are like, this task is less important to me. And we think this has all kinds of implications. For instance, I play hockey a lot. I play with the coach of the Cornell hockey team, and he doesn't allow any social media for 3 hours before or after a game. And we think we're just about to write a paper together. It's for this exact reason. If you're affirmed, you're not going to look back at that game and think about, how could I improve myself? Or right before the game, I'm not going to try really hard because, you know what, in my life, I've got my family, everything's good. So we think that it's actually important in some cases, like athletes, to not feel affirmed before or after a game, but to instead have that drive. Yeah.
So how long does this positive self-esteem last?
That's a great effect, speaking at the sort of societal level. We are operationalizing it at the sort of state level, so minutes to maybe hours. But there's a very good question here. How long afterwards? So we often see, and when we show this stuff to our students, I have 180 in my social media class, they all resonate with this idea of like before or after a really hard test or task, like an assignment, they spend a lot of time on there. We call it procrastination, but it may be serving some psychological value. So this, I think, is what I wanted to say, to stand in contrast to this idea that, Facebook makes you feel stupid or not as good as other people, that there's these contrast effects that's coming out right now in a number of other studies. Okay, so that concludes our second dive. I need to switch over to a different program to go into our last one. So are there any questions on the on that so far, on the sort of self-affirmation stuff? I actually think it's really rather intuitive and makes a lot of sense. And this fairly negative view, psychological view, it has to be balanced by the fact that it's a multifaceted sort of experience. Okay, here's our last dive. Hope everybody's feeling all right. And here I'm going to go less into the details of the experiment. This is probably the work I've done the most consistently over the last 10 years. So I'm going to give high-level stuff, and you guys feel free to ask me questions about the methods. But lies turn out to be really interesting because there's many ways where, when you think of the internet even more broadly, that you can imagine technology facilitating deception. So here's a company, an actual company based in Chicago. And they're an alibi company. They provide alibis for people. So you would call them up, and you could, let's say I wanted Lily to believe that I was in Vancouver tonight, staying at the W there, not here. So I would call this company up and say, look, I need this person to know that I'm staying in Vancouver. And they're like, sure, no problem, give her this number. So when Lily dials that number, what she hears is, hello, this is Vancouver, the W, how can I help you? She says, I'd like Jeff Hancock's room. And they say, certainly, no problem. And then they'll patch her through to my cell phone or to my room here in Washington. And they have all kinds of services like that. So they can do a bunch of things by email. They have some fax ones. Basically what they're trying to say here is they're multimedia. This is just coming off of their webpage. And I see, whenever I talk about this, people are like, truth alibi, okay, I should get this number down. Here's the various kind of services and the current price list that you can have. And this fits our beliefs around how how technology can affect deception. So, you know, like this, it's like a rescue call service. You know, I mean, some of it's sort of like, really? Really? People will pay for that? And we've heard, you know, there's these lie clubs. So people form a club in which whenever they need a lie told via text, they can send it to the club and then somebody will say that. So if I wanted to get out of work early, I could have somebody text and say that something's happened to my wife and I need to go home, and I could show whoever I was meeting with that. So we can see there's lots of ways in which technology can do that. Here's another example. So there's a lot of really great pages out there that have allowed people that are ill or have ill family members to generate money for healthcare costs. Well, of course, now we're starting to see these fake pages where people are faking illness or a baby's illness to get money. Here's a very common one. So you've probably all said on my way and or received a text about that, and in fact you weren't on your way. These are something we call butler lies. So you know, right now Lily or Scott with my cell phone number can get a hold of me. Literally, they could call me at any time during the day. And this sort of 24-hour on connectivity has, believe, as we were starting to document, increase these things called butler lies, which are statements we use to buffer that connectivity. So we see a lot of people saying, oh, I'm sorry I didn't get your call, my phone was dead. I'm sorry I didn't call you back, I was in a bad reception area. And so we've done a lot of these butler lies studies. We call them butler lies because back in the day, butlers actually did this. We found a manual from the 18th century that was for butlers, and one section of it was about handling visitors. And they actually talked about, check with your master, and if the master is busy, you go and provide some excuses, and they provided excuses that you would give visitors. Well, we have to do that ourselves now. We find we've done about 4 of these SMS studies, 10% of messages, text messages, are lies. So this is a retrospective identification task. And about 20% of all the lies are these butler lies. So that means about 1%, 1 to 2% of text messages involve a person providing some excuse or account about why they can't interact, or couldn't interact, or won't be able to interact in the future. Again, sounds small, but when you think about the billions of messages sent per day.
Can you explain how you got your estimates?
Yes, absolutely. So this is perfect example of asking more about methods. What we do is we bring students. We now have a community sample. They come into the lab, but we also have a web version of this. Come in the lab and we explain what we're interested in is deception. Here's what it is. Sounds bad. Most people tell you don't do deception. We're not interested in whether, on judging you. Think of the lies as like little birds, and you're a bird watcher. We just want you to count the birds. Open up your phone and write into this web form the last 30 messages that you sent, and then beside indicate whether it was a lie, and then write something like that would be more honest. If you were to say something that was truthful, what would you say? And then that way what we can do is we can code the kinds of lies. And people aren't always perfect, so sometimes they'll say like, oh man, that guy's head is as big as the moon. That's not a lie, and so what we do is when we go through it, we can take those out. We call those jocularity. So it's a retrospective task. If anything, this is an underestimate. Yeah. But what we find them to be very, we look through them and it's pretty impressive. They're very honest. The lovely thing about this is we see these little lies all the time, on my way, these sort of things. But we also see people being like, what are you talking about? I'm not at the bar. And then they say that they were lying, and I'm actually at the bar. Well, I'm not with that guy. I'm with that guy. So they're really fantastic lies. Yeah.
What are the other 80%? Is this the most common?
No, this is about, like it's a fifth, and so a lot of the other ones are about, we just finished this one, content. So they can be about facts, feelings, activities, and explanations. And these are, text messages are, the most common are about feelings and about activities. And the activities make sense, that's really what these are. It's lying about what you're doing and who you're with and stuff like that, because texting is really about coordination, usually. And then the feelings one was sort of a surprise to us, but the generation that we're looking at right now, I think the community sample will be different. They're using it for more than just coordinating. They're actually expressing a lot of socio-emotional and relational stuff. So, yeah, it's a ton. Good. Now, those are sort of the smaller, mundane things every day. We also have been working with the DoD for a number of years now, looking at different types of messages they'd like to detect or to triage. So if they have, if an agency has, say, an internet tip desk, they want help in trying to sort the messages into these people are crazy, don't have to worry about them. This person looks like it's really important that we look at. This one looks like deceptive, maybe it's counterintelligence from some other agency. And this is one of the ones that actually started us off. This is an actual message that the CIA had. And it was in a bunch of other messages. And the question is, could you detect it based on others? Because, as you might imagine, they often don't say terrorist #1 when they're in the chat room. So it was a coded message. We would have no idea how to get this. Here's the code. I have to get some glasses. And glasses refers to the city of Glass, which is Hong Kong. Before I get incense, which is the big bazaar in Bangkok. And then wedding is the bombing. I've actually switched those up. Wedding is the bombing event, and Thursday is the anchor. So you have a 3-day sort of itinerary here. And so you can see there's just so much text. In fact, I think we're at this really amazing point in human history where for 60,000 years we've been talking to each other, and as we talk, everything disappears. It's what Herb Clark calls evanescent. So our words just disappear as we say them. 60,000 years, a long time to be talking to one another. And in the last, say, 10, 20 years, that's coming to be radically changed. So now a lot of what I say gets recorded. In fact, I'm just now looking at my email and comparing that to my academic output. And my email to academic output is about 15-1 so far, and we're still working on analysis. I do way more emailing than I do actually writing what I'm paid to do. And so much of what I say, be it text messaging, emailing, blogging, on Facebook, et cetera, is now being recorded. Politicians have lived in this environment for a while and have started to adjust to the fact that everything they say is recorded and is searchable and copyable and analyzable. But we regular folk are just now not actually getting accustomed to it, we're now encountering it. So it's a really fascinating time to be looking at text and deception. So here is a definition that we'll work with for the remainder of the talk. Intentionally creating a false belief. Those two pieces in red are key. So the intentional part is to make sure we don't talk about mistakes as deception. So if Lily told me the talk was at 3 today, but she really believed that it was at 3, she really thought it was at 3, that'd be a mistake, not a deception. And when we think about, for example, the false claims around the rationale to invade Iraq and all the Bush administration statements, which we've analyzed, this intentionality becomes a really key belief or question, because the 9/11 Commission showed there was no weapons of mass destruction, there were no links to Al Qaeda, so we have false statements that created a false belief. But most of the administration said they really believed that they had it, although some, like Scott McClellan, has a book out that says actually we intentionally did this. The false belief part is another key aspect. So false belief has to be that you're generating in someone else a belief that you know to be false. And so this is the classic thinking of a lie, but it allows us to get sarcasm and irony out. So I could say, Madonna's halftime show was really interesting. And some of you who maybe know me would think that I didn't think that at all. Actually, you know what? I really did like the second half. But the first part where they're walking out with all the Roman things, I just didn't get that. Anyways, so you would know that I was saying something that I believed to be false, but I was not trying to get you to also believe it to be false. So this is the key. These are the two things. You've got to avoid mistakes and avoid including sarcasm. Any questions about the definition? There are thousands of definitions, and in philosophy it can get a lot more intense, but this, I think, is a very good pragmatic one. Okay, so we're just going to go over one of our most recent text ones. We've looked at chat, we've looked at online dating, we've looked at presidential speeches, we're starting to look at insurance fraud, there's just so many ways in which there's text that involves deception and truthful statements. Here's a review of the hotel at Cornell. And the one question that we started with about 2 years ago is, can we tell if the person had actually stayed there or not? And can we do that not by looking at, say, who this person is, or where their IP is coming from, or how many times they reviewed, but by looking at just what the text is. And so this is what we set out to do. We have a paper that will be coming out for dub in April, but here's just a little taste. We can see that in red here, this is hotels.com, that our estimate of deception, and I can explain to you how we get that, shows it somewhat increasing over time. Okay, but TripAdvisor just got sued successfully because the company said, we think that up to 1/5 of all of your reviews are false, which means 20%. When we saw that, we're like, that's crazy. A system based on trust, like this kind of a system is, couldn't operate with that amount of deception. So instead what we're finding is it's relatively low. And if you look at these error bars, even the very worst possible estimate is 7%. And our latest estimate has the mean for something like TripAdvisor and Hotels.com, which allow anybody to, TripAdvisor, which allows anybody to post a review on there. You don't have to buy anything, is around 6% of these kinds of lies where you can pay someone that's never been at the hotel. Other sites like Hotel.com, they actually require you to buy the hotel, and then you have to have stayed there. You have to have paid for it, and then after the date of the stay, you can then post it. So the cost is much higher to do a review on Hotel.com, and sure enough, we see a lot less deception. But let me get to how we sort of do that. And to do that, we have to do our last activity, I promise, and then we'll wrap up. You're now going to do your second activity. So same partners, okay? But this time, the people with the lighter colored shirt, I want you to think about a trip that you went on recently. And people with a dark colored shirt, it's time for you to close your eyes. Go ahead and close your eyes. Remember the light colored shirts close their eyes and behaved very well. And here's the instructions. Okay, so we have the instructions there. Very good. Anybody need any more time? Okay, so partner with the lightest colored shirt, you're going to tell your story. Dark colored shirts, you can open your eyes. Light colored shirts, tell the dark colored shirts about a trip you went on recently.
Winter, kids were off school, I took them off work. We decided to go up to Whistler for a couple weeks. So we went there and hung out there. It was kind of fun. 1-year-old it was kind of nice.
Okay, wrap your trip up. Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, dark colored shirts, you have a task now, and your task is to determine whether your partner was lying to you or not. Yeah, this is a non-interrogation task, because actually it's very different than if you get to interrogate them. Right now, you're not going to be able to interrogate them. You're going to have to review what you just heard and decide now if you think your partner was lying to you. And if you think your partner was lying to you, I want you to raise your hand, okay, and keep your hand up. So we have 3 people in the room. Hold on, keep your hands up, guys. All right, here we go. So on this side of the room, you were being lied to. Who had your hand up? Very good. There's our lie detector right there. The only person on this side of the room that got it right. All right, now who are the 2 people that had their hands up over here? You're callous, mean, horrible people. You accuse them of lying. You're callous, mean, and horrible? Aha, I see. You caused her to think that you were deceptive. Oh, played. Now, normally what I do is I have to let everybody, especially on this side of the room, debrief because you've been lied to, but just know that I made them do it, okay? But let's just ask ourselves a question. This side of the room, only 1 person was correct. This side of the room, only 2 people were incorrect. The majority were right. Now, does that mean that this side of the room is much poorer relationally? They have 0 social sense, whereas this side of the room is much better at that? I mean, there's a clear difference. This is almost 100% accuracy, and this is almost 0 accuracy.
Or is it just that people trust? And
exactly right.
Trust?
What you guys just demonstrated is probably in fact, not probably, the strongest single phenomenon in about 45 years of deception research. Is something called the truth bias. It's the most powerful effect in all of the deception studies. It is so powerful, in fact, that a lot of philosophers have talked about the need for it. We have a very hard time accusing somebody else of being deceptive. It's how con artists make a living. And philosophers have argued that without the truth bias, without this sense of being a cooperative listener, that you believe the other person is saying is true, language as we use it, as the human species use it, simply could not operate. And without that truth bias, without language, then society as we know it doesn't work. So it's really foundational to who we are as humans. The other main finding here, I've just listed a few brief things up here, is there is no single cue. If I were to ask you guys, how could you tell if the other person was lying? Most people would say, eyes, there's something shifty about the eyes, or their face looked a little funny, or they're twitchy. In fact, when a recent survey asked 77 different cultures, the number one cue that people believe is related to deception is eyes. And for humans, detecting deception in real time, eyes are completely non-predictive. It turns out that if you get somebody to recount a lie backwards, they blink more. But most people don't get a chance to ask them to tell the lie backwards because they didn't know they were being lied to. But that's a little technique if you want to try that. So the nonverbal cues are really, really poor reliability. There's almost none. And a recent meta-analysis of all the deception studies in the last, actually a little bit more than 45 years now, almost 50, found the average deception detection rate of 54%. Yes?
I have 5 questions, but I'll only do one, maybe 2. So how much does risk play into it? Because it seems like there's very low risk here, and so therefore
Right.
there's very, and as an aside, I changed one fact out of the 40 or so that I was telling.
I heard your story, and I could actually tell that what you were doing was taking a story that had happened and you just changed one thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But, and so, I mean, how much does that play into the study?
Huge. In fact, it's bigger than you can imagine, I think. What a lot of the people like Paul Ekman and Mark Frank have talked about is the importance of stakes. So I was a customs officer in Canada when I was in college and for a year after that. And I was on a place called Pender Island, so a lot of people from Seattle on their pleasure boats would come up through Pender Island. That's a high-stakes situation. If you have a gun, if you have a lot of booze, drugs, kidnapping a kid, which I never did encounter, thankfully. But I did arrest 16 Americans for bringing a weapon into Canada. That's a high-stakes situation, and you are more likely to show nonverbal behaviors then. But it's still not at a reliable level. The highest that they can really get up to is around 75 to 80%. And it's because there's many ways that people can lie, and there are some people that and the reason I say it's more important than you can imagine is what we've concluded in our lab is it's all about context. So I might be able to lie in one context really well and show no cues, but in another context I will show some cues, and so will a whole bunch of other people. But there's always going to be about 20-25% of people for a given deception task, they can sail through it. And they're literally not giving any cues. It's not a matter of like, we haven't measured it. We've measured everything now, from heat sensors. The only thing isn't brainwaves, but brainwaves will be very, very difficult because you have to sort of stay still, Yes, ma'am?
The truth bias, is that based on people really believing that they were told the truth, or the fact that people don't want to admit that they've been lied to and that they fell for it?
Right. So what you're getting at is something called self-deception. And for years I've avoided it because I find it too scary of a beast. But I just started reading a great book, I highly recommend it, by Robert Trivers, who's an evolutionary psychologist, and he has a book called, happily, Self-Deception. It's fantastic. He basically argues that self-deception, the kind that you're talking about, is an offensive strategy. So if you're deceiving yourself, it makes it much more easy to deceive others. That's his main hypothesis, and I think it's quite compelling. Okay. Well, for the purposes of our talk, though, the fact that there are no nonverbals that really are reliable all the time is important, because when we ask people across the country, and again in national surveys, where do you think people lie more, on the internet or face-to-face, or more specifically on the phone versus face-to-face, or email versus face-to-face, the mediated channel always wins. People always believe that you lie more there. And we've found time and again now that if you're talking to somebody you know, you're less likely to lie in a mediated form like texting or email than if you are talking to them face-to-face or on the phone. So text happens to be, with people that you know, a very honest medium so far. And you can tell one of the reasons why is the recordability of it. think of any political scandal over the last 10 years, they screwed up by tweeting something or some photo, or they said something that ended up getting revealed later. Now, the reason for why this is important is because we're in this new phase, we're leaving text behind us all the time, and allows us and computational linguists to work together to start to analyze this. So here are two reviews. One of them is actually a real review from TripAdvisor. The other is one that we paid a Turker, an Amazon Turker, to create. They're the same hotel. I encourage you to try and decide which one is deceptive. While you're doing that, I will say that more and more work says that language is not as well controlled as we once thought. So the reason that Ekman and those folks focused on nonverbals was there was an assumption that our words were highly controlled, whereas our body was not. In the last 15 years of psycholinguistics has shown that much of what we say, all of these little words like the and of and very and we, these are function words. We have zero control over them. We don't pay attention to them, and we don't know when we're producing them. And so about half of our language is out of our conscious control. And that's where we look when we're looking for clues as to whether something's deceptive or not. Now in this case, you guys are looking at it, and probably one of the things you're looking at is like, well, maybe one is more overly enthusiastic, or maybe it's more general. Those two things actually are related. But think psychologically now about what we know when somebody visits a place. So if you experience a space, your body does most of the encoding of the spatial information. This is called embodied cognition. And if I actually don't experience a space, I have to make it up in my mind, and that's going to be much more impoverished. All right, so now see if that helps. All right, so you're going to stay at the James in Chicago, and you're trying to decide whether you should believe these reviews. Who believes that the first one is the deception? Okay. And who believes that this one is the deception? All right, so just a very small number think the second one. The second one, right? The second one is deception. So most of you are wrong. Only about 5 people were right. It's very difficult. I actually do not do very well on the tasks when we give it to ourselves. The reason for that is the algorithm that we use, we're showing about the top 6 weighted features in the algorithm. It's a support vector machine that's using n-grams, bigrams, and Luke's dictionary. Luke is the thing I was telling you before that can look at emotion, it can look at function words, etc. It's analyzing 70 or 80 things simultaneously. It's very difficult for a human consciously to look at these parts of language that we don't pay attention to. But you can see how we break it down when we work on the theory around this. So we're now looking at doctor reviews, and if believe it or not, there's a lot of doctor reviews that are faked, which seems wrong at a stake sort of level that you were asking about. And we believe theoretically that we're not going to see the exact same thing here. So if it's about visiting the doctor's office, we may see some spatial information differences, but we're going to see other things. Just like when we look at online dating profiles, we can detect online dating profiles, not as well as this algorithm, for detecting people that have never been in the space, performs at 90%, which is insane. I've never seen anything like that. I made our team rerun the whole analyses because I didn't believe it. But when we're looking at online dating profiles, we can get around 70% accuracy by looking at just the text to tell if whether they're lying about their height, weight, or income. And so what we're able to do now is look at these texts in very different contexts, create models specific to the context, high stake, low stake, what is the content about, and make a decision there. And so, yeah, Scott.
All those features, how did you determine what those features were?
There's 2 ways.
Derived?
Yeah, so one is there's a theoretical top-down approach. So we were very interested in spatial information, so we include a lot of spatial features. And then there's the bottom-up empirical part where we threw in a lot of the n-gram stuff. And most of that was unigrams, and let the SVM use those as it wanted to. But we would include things from Luke that were theoretically we believed to be important. Yeah.
And what was the ground truth in that classification?
Yeah, good question. So this was scraped from TripAdvisor. It's possible that was fake, but according to our other estimate, we believe that there's about a 94% chance that that's legitimate, and we sampled 10,000 of these and reran that through with 400 at a time, so we're feeling pretty good about that. This was created by Amazon Turkers, who actually paid 400 Turkers $1 to write this review, this kind of review. There were 20 hotels in Chicago, with a bonus of another $1 if they could fool our human judges. So we had students in my lab, and when they were judging these, they did actually a little better than you guys. You guys did really actually spectacularly horrible. They performed about 58%, which is a little bit above that mean of 54%. But most our humans did very poorly on this. Yes, you had a question.
Well, maybe it doesn't matter because they seem very similar, but that review isn't the same one as the next.
Oh, is that right?
It's missing the last line that had the repeated references to Jane Chicago.
Well, that was unfair of me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. So this one repeated it.
That's why. Actually, the next one has a reference to Lake Michigan, and this one doesn't.
Oh.
View of Lake Michigan is not.
This is a different.
They could be different. I'm sorry about that. But I mean, so this is the one we did the graphics on. This one definitely is the fake one.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but I will be more careful on that. I'll maybe include the other
one.
one.
I noticed is like the typo. So is that also a technique of like, because definitely is spelled wrong. So do they intentionally introduce things?
Yes. So we actually monitor Amazon Turk and a few of these other ones where the requests go in, and we watch. So now they have reacted to our algorithm, which is really cool because now they're getting them to do certain things, which is way higher than should be done by chance. And so the algorithm gets more accurate. We're now doing studies where we get people where we train them with countermeasures, and the algorithm does better on them than the people that weren't trained on countermeasures. Because humans have a very difficult time like producing randomly natural language. Does that make sense? So when you do genre analysis, you can just break this down, and it's just a series of frequencies, and people perform very badly at doing that naturally.
So are these Turkers, do we assume that they're people who are, like, go out and do reviews on Turk for a...
Not necessarily.
It could be a pattern that they refer to the name of the hotel 3 times as a marketing kind of...
They do. In fact, a lot of times when they're instructed, and this was before our research came out, a lot of the instructions would be mention the name so that you're clear that you were there. They would also tell them to talk about, to use really positive terms. So we see a lot of positive adjectives. That's the simplest thing. But the other thing, for example, that it's very difficult for people to control is you look at the amount of first-person singular in here. So my, I, there's plural as well with we. So first-person pronouns go way, way up, which is actually the opposite of all of our other work. We think it's because the person's overcompensating, trying to put themselves in there. Also, when you're lying, you think about narrative. That's the way humans have sort of evolved to lie. We think about the story. And so when you think about story, you think about who and what. So they talk a lot about who they were there with, and they talk about what they were doing. So more often business. And as I said, these countermeasures approaches are coming out, but hilariously, it's actually helping us. Yes?
Are there similar indicators that you could use for like product reviews?
Well, we're beginning on that. Product reviews we think are going to be tougher. And pardon me?
Resumes and cover letters seems like it would be.
We've done resumes. So we're working on the linguistic part. But here's a quick question for you guys, and maybe this will give you a sense of where I'm coming from. So the 3 types of research have one common thing. Where do you think people lie more often? A paper-based resume that they would hand in, or a LinkedIn profile? So more lies on LinkedIn. Why?
Paper.
More lies on paper.
LinkedIn, your friends who are your connections might see it, and then you'd be embarrassed.
Exactly right. So you have a piece coming out in cyber psychology and network and social, whatever that journal has like super long names called, where we show that actually the number overall of lies are exactly the same. In the US, it's 3 in paper and 3 in LinkedIn, and this matches a whole bunch of other stuff. In the UK, it's lower. It seems like exaggeration's more okay in the US. But the types of deception get squashed. So on paper, the lies are focused in previous responsibilities and skill sets. And on LinkedIn, they get moved down into interests and hobbies. And we think it's because responsibilities and stuff, the network that you have can actually detect those deceptions. Your former boss says, actually, you weren't working here in 2010, right? Whereas I love kite surfing. Well, guess who can tell whether I love kite surfing or not? Me. No one else gets to decide that. And so what happens when these resumes go public, especially public in front of a network, the lies still happen, they just get moved into different types. And it turns out that if I say I like kite surfing, that actually still has positive self-presentation effects because it means I'm a cool person that's active and I like to travel, say. So yeah. I can't remember what the last point I was going to say, but of the 3 themes of research I was going to show you, there's a belief set in the population that things that are online are worse in some way, they're deficient. And what we end up looking at it much more closely is that this is going to sound so academic and boring, but it's more complicated. And in many ways, the reason that social media, from, if you want to include email as that, to the latest on, say, the plan, is that it works. It provides people psychologically and relationally valuable stuff. I feel a bit weird saying that here because you guys kind of work on that stuff anyways. But hopefully, to some degree, this is validating and is a little bit of a pushback, hopefully not in a Pollyannish way, of this idea that it's hurting our lives. So thank you guys very much, and happy to take general questions.
I was wondering if you could go back to your comment about why emoticons are a misnomer.
Right. So it's for 2 reasons. The number one reason is I don't think, so it's broken down to emotion and icon. And in linguistic theory, icon is a certain thing, which is a pointer to something, a physical pointer. I don't even want to get that technical on it. It means that what I'm doing now is a representation or points to my current emotion. And when people send smileys, they rarely mean I am happy right now. What they usually mean is interpret what I'm saying in a certain way. So they're helping frame or shape the interpretation for that. Or they're indicating, like, I got that you were being funny in that last one. Does that make sense? Yeah. When I look at emoticons, and for a while there I was asking people when they'd send me something that had an emoticon, I'm like, oh, hey, by the way, can I just ask you a quick question? How are you feeling? It never corresponded with the emoticon. And so
You need to invent a new word.
I have one. It will never work. But it's based on Herb Clark's stuff. He calls those kind of things emblems. So they're emblicons. That'll never stick. But anyways, that's, I know, right? Yeah. But that's what I think is happening, is it's almost like nonverbal language, which helps you interpret the meaning of the message.
I'll help you spread that.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that, Lily. Thanks, guys.
So you talked about sort of 3 3 small areas of presentation. The last one being mostly the live focus one. Of that section, how much of the stuff that you presented do you say is actually true?
Could you clarify?
So.
Because it's lab-based, or because
the citations of the number of SMS lies, and the existence of alibi.whatever.com.
He thinks your talk is an
I think you're
exercise in
lying.
deception.
Meta-deception. Very nice. I'd like to think, I could go back and go over it, but I'm going to go with a 99% on that. There might be 1 or 2 things in there that...
Does this one count?
Meta line. Dang. Usually I'm the one that gets to work the audience over in that sort of way.
He needs to do another test.
Yeah, right. We'll do a test on you later. Is there anything in there that you have any concerns about?
Yeah, I don't know, the first 5 or 6 examples.
What was one of them, for example?
The alibi service thing,
Mm-hmm.
like $75 to say that you're calling a rescue service. I dispute the number, at least that. Like you were overly specific in ways that I am skeptical.
I don't have internet access, but if anybody else would like to go, you can go to alibinetwork.net, I believe. It's a real company. In fact, I was on a documentary. The reason I found out about them is the documentarians came after they were in Chicago looking at the Alibi Network. So it's a real one. There is another one that was called Fake MySpace, where you could rent friends for 99 cents a month to make your MySpace page back in the day look better. But when it got all the press, it folded.
If it's a lie, he set up the website before that.
I've heard that not everything on the internet is true. So maybe you got played.
Yeah, very, very good, very good. Yes.
So I just have a question, like on the work that you guys did on TripAdvisor and Hotel.com. Is that information being passed back to them to try to remove those reviews? You know, I'm an engineer, so I think
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
the browser plugin for Amazon.com.
Right. We were talking with...
all the fake ones.
In fact, if you guys want, for those of you that are interested, we have a small fun website called reviewskeptic.com. And it takes our algorithm and you can copy and paste in there. We have an API for it. like I said, we're talking with Expedia and been working with them. TripAdvisor, although they're tough, this is very sensitive to them because they just lost this massive lawsuit. So they want to go through a lot of NDAs and stuff before we can look at what they call their plutonium, because they're very concerned about countermeasures. They're very concerned about being perceived negatively. We thought they'd be excited by that because there's absolutely no way that 20% can be there. But anyways, back to your point, you're an engineer, never mind about all that stuff. Yes, we have developed the algorithm and we want to work with companies to use it to enhance the sort of trustability of a lot of these reviews. Because if we're going to go with reviews like this, amateur reviewing, it has to be trusted for it to work.
It seems like you weren't tying it to any user accounts, but if you add to that, then that you see a high percentage of
exactly
suspect reviews for a given user, you know to block that user.
There's tons of interesting metadata there that they have access to that we don't, which is one of the reasons we want to work with them. We want the data. So we think we can take this linguistic information, and that's one source, and then you look at the IP, you look at other reviews. So in fact, if you look at people on TripAdvisor that have only posted once, then you get this 6% very rough estimate of their deception. And then if you take out the people that only have reviewed once, you move them out, the deception rate goes down. Because then, that's right. So we've been talking with them and others about like how to do that. We think there's a lot of different ways. So, get them to describe what the hotel looked like in a sentence, and then they can do the review. And if we're right, then that should knock out most of the people that have never stayed there. Because you can ask a question like, where's the restaurant in the W in Seattle? I've stayed at the restaurant. It's impossible for me not to know that.
Is the lobby on the first floor or the second floor?
Exactly right. Very simple. And so, we think these are things that can be implemented, and we want to work with any company that wants to do that.
Follow up on what he's saying in regards to identity and reputation, like systems that actually include that either reward, long-time reviewers or identify them in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Like you say, knock out everybody who's just done one review.
Right, or you ghost
it goes
them.
way down.
Right.
Is there any research into those systems when you apply identity? Any kind of truth to their review?
Yeah. So there's a great situation now that's happening on Amazon naturally, the Vine level reviewers. And Trevor Pinch, my colleague at Cornell, he's a sociologist. He's interviewed these folks, and it looks like it's not. So identity is not a panacea. So these folks can be compromised without their knowing even. So they get, the Vine program, these people get free products sent to them, and then they provide reviewers. But they're really good reviewers. They've done hundreds and hundreds of reviews, and so Amazon believes they're trusted reviewers. And Trevor's argument is that biases can come into that because they're all getting all this product, and you see very few negative Vine reviews. And so the New York Times one that just caused the recent dust up was a company that on the surface wasn't doing anything illegal. They were selling Kindle covers, and then when you got the Kindle cover, it would say, hey, we really want good reviews, or we want lots of reviews, and they would refund the price of the Kindle if you would write a review. And they never said we want 5-star reviews. They said we strive for 5-star service. And when New York Times found this out, they sent it to Amazon. Amazon pulled the Kindle cover, and then several days later, they pulled the company's other product, which weirdly was a stun gun. I mean, what company has Kindle covers and stun guns? I don't know.
Well, like, they do that at car dealerships, right? Like, if you buy a car, at the end of it, there's like, here's the review. It's 1 to 5. Anything less than 1 or 5, and I get fired.
Oh, right.
That's for internal more than external. It's for internal more than external.
Sure, but it's still kind of they're enforcing a bias, I guess.
Yeah, there's an incentive that's not for truth.
All right, so take one more question and then.
I just had the one more question to follow up. Now, did reviews scale like where if people were less likely to lie if they were giving like a 3-star review out of 5, or like a 1-star or a 5-star?
We haven't looked at that yet. We looked at 5-star reviews, and we've just finished looking at 1-star reviews. We thought there would be more on that space. Of course, now they're being told to not write 5-star or 1-star reviews, which makes it harder to manipulate the reviews. So, and we can do around 85 to 86% for the negative reviews.
I know I've read studies that talk about the usefulness of your average user review, just because your average user isn't going to log on and write a review, something they feel okay about.
Right.
They're only going to log on and review something that they feel either very
Really
strongly
strongly
in one direction. So.
Yeah. Though there are people that just love it. They feel compelled and they enjoy reviewing after every stay. I was just talking to a woman who I thought was, she's super bubbly, et cetera, and she just, like, anything she'd ever did, she reviewed in her life. Yeah, so anyways, I'll end it there, but thank you guys so much. It's been a really enjoyable experience.